Yeah, let's just get settled in. Let the spine be nice and tall. Just allow yourself to feel yourself in your seat, feel yourself on the ground. Feel your breath deepening. And I would like to focus on 3 words that I sometimes associate with LSD. And it might be because they also start with the letter L. I can sometimes, when we refer to this, sometimes this medicine gets lovingly referred to as L. And then we think, what does L stand for? And the first one that I'd like us to think of is just life. It's just being grateful that we're here and we're alive. As we breathe, we can feel ourselves bringing life force into our body. And so we're tuning into our physicality. We're tuning into our vibrancy. We're tuning into our energy. And so it's almost as if you breathe, right? You're bringing that vibrancy into the body, and it's going first to the lungs, but then it's spreading out through the whole body. And maybe that's happening as it circulates through the blood. Maybe you feel like that's happening just energetically, it's just permeating. And let's just take another few moments to enjoy and to be grateful for this precious life. And so one thing that we find that our psychedelic experiences can do is that they do turn us onto a new appreciation for life, for our life, for the importance of maybe what we're going to do with our limited time here on Earth. And sometimes we also feel deeply interconnected with all of the life on the planet. We might find ourselves out in nature, seeing the trees breathe, right? We might be compelled to take our shoes off and snuggle the soles of our feet into the earth. We can kind of feel the heartbeat of the earth, it would seem. Almost see like the rays of the sun shining down, smiling upon us. Sometimes even, the rocks and the clouds seem to be alive. And we are struck with its preciousness. And then from here, we spoke about the sun. And so as we think of the sun, we think of light. We almost feel like as we're breathing, and I know it might be nighttime for some of us, depending where we are in the planet, but you can just visualize that you're actually breathing in the light of the sun into your body. That this quality of brilliance and radiance enters the body on the breath. And so that life force, that vitality, and that energy has that brightness to it. And that brightness has the ability to dispel darkness. And that brightness is a metaphor for the brightness of the mind. Our brilliant intelligence, the brilliance of our soul, of our spirit. And so as we visualize ourselves breathing light in, we can feel perhaps things like confusion disappear. lethargy or depression or misunderstanding. And it brings with it a sense of clarity. And so as we purify our mind with this brightness, right? So first with life, we're talking about the body. And then we move into light and we're talking about the mind, the head. Right? And so the life purifies our body of illness, sickness, stagnancy. And the light purifies our mind. You can maybe even guess what the third L is, right? It's love. And this inspires us to take this light and this life that we're breathing into our body and just breathe it there into the center of the chest, into the heart. And there is a wonderful song written by a wonderful band. It was actually not, it's older. It's a traditional song, as it were. It was sung by the Grateful Dead, which is, arguably one of the bands that is kind of most related to LSD, right? And very important to psychedelic culture in America. And the line from the song is quite simply, turn on your love light. So they took two of these words, they put them together. And so what we see, if we actually think about that as a possibility of turning on our love light, we're seeing that that it's an inside job. That so often we think of like, oh, love will come from outside of me. I have to find love, and that will look like a person. I will fall in love with that person, and then I will have love. And that's nice if that's what you want, and if that happens, it's great. But one thing that people discover in their psychedelic experiences very often is that they, in fact, are the source of love. That each and every one of us, we've got 40 people, 40 participants in this room right now. They're just walking generators of love. And just breathe right down in there. And we consider our connection. We were talking about connecting to love and connecting to life and all life. And so what I would like us to think about doing is just allowing ourselves to feel connected to the 39 other people in the room. You don't have to know them. You don't have to know stuff about them, but just recognize that, they have the same sincerity that you do for a path of growth and healing. They've come to this space, even though there's some certain stigmas around it and confusion and, there's, cultural issues, right? Being here, perhaps, but they still, bravery, courage, discipline to show up, just like you did. And so let's just sort of extend our love out in a net for all of those people, all those 40 other people that are here. And at the same time, and this is like a really cool part, is that you can recognize that those people are also extending that love right back to you. Right? So no matter what anybody told you before you showed up today, it's like we here at TAM Integration, believe very strongly, maybe even deeper than believe. It has been revealed to us in psychedelic meditations that everybody here is worthy of love. you're not gonna change my mind. And so that means you. And so just like you're a source of it, you're built perfectly to receive it too. Just like you have receptors, like serotonin receptors and GABA receptors. We're just going to say that you have heart receptors too. You just take it all in, even if they're crusty from lack of use. Even if it needs a little bit of steel wool, you can just use your breath as that steel wool. You can use the light that you're drawing in from the sun as that cleanser. So we'll just take another few breaths. So just think about these qualities and think that you actually have the opportunity to continue to cultivate these outside of the circle. You don't need me. You can do this all on your own for the rest of your life. We call that integration. And just gently opening the eyes. Reorienting yourself back in the room without losing your connection to those qualities. And so just attempting to maintain those qualities. Allow that energy to continue to move through your body as we hear from Dr. Saad. And we'll take questions about that after. We just want to have, for editing's sake, we're going to keep the presentations together and the Q&A afterwards. So thank you for your kind attention. And Doctor, you're up.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for leading that, Daniel. Got a couple of screens up. Give me one sec. Can you guys see the screen right now? Okay, do you see, like, it says, it has the LSD front screen. Good, all good, awesome. Volume okay?
Yes.
Cool.
You're great.
Great. One sec. Okay. Thank you everyone for coming today. My name is Saad, and I am a pharmacist. I am the founder of Silo Health, a company geared toward the education, legislation, and integration of psilocybin. So getting to learn more about LSD was an awesome opportunity, and I'm excited to share my findings with you all. I'm also a co-founder of the Psychedelic Pharmacists Association. It is an Oregonian-based nonprofit geared toward advocating for pharmacists to be involved in the continuum of care of psychedelic therapy, especially if we're trying to really promote access and really accessibility and safety. And I'm also the vice president of the Psychedelic Club of Pittsburgh. So if you know anyone in the Pittsburgh area looking for a psychedelic community, please have them reach out to me. We're active on Facebook. We're active on Meetup. We have a booming Slack channel, growing Slack channel. So yeah, if you know anyone in Pittsburgh looking for connections, please have them reach out. So before we get into LSD, I do want to get into Urgot. I'm sure it's a familiar term with some of you other psychedelic enthusiasts. So Urgot is a group of fungi that grow on rye and grains, and it causes ergotism. This disease state is essentially the effect of a long-term ergot poisoning. And some of the symptoms we see here are listed on this slide. The ones I really wanted to highlight are some of the sensory disturbances, some psychological symptoms and hallucinations, headaches, tinnitus, ringing in the ears. And I bring this up because it's just a fun fact. Some folks believe that the Salem witch trials were due in part to a wet harvest of rye, leading to an overgrowth of this type of fungi on the bread, and that the long-term exposure of this ergot bread could have led to some symptoms in a very dark time with not much lighting, and some other cultural beliefs leading to the Salem witch trials. So feel free to dig into that. I mean, it's a very cool thought. And the reason why I bring that up and why it's relevant to our conversation today is because if you have ergot, which has ergoline and ergotamine. Ergotamine is here on the left, and the only difference really we see here with ergotamine and LSD is this circled group right there. Additionally, there are two ethyl groups, hence the diethyl on the amide right over here. So that's really the difference between one of the main components in ergot fungi and LSD. I wanted to talk about the history as well. I think the history is an amazing one, and especially if you're interested about psychedelics or you've already known about psychedelics, it's just it's great to gather some of the cultural background as to leading us to where we're at today in history. So Albert Hofmann, he's a Swiss chemist. He worked at Sandoz Pharmaceuticals. He synthesized LSD in 1938 while developing ergot-based derivatives to try to find different therapeutic benefits, specifically in childbirth. Now, he created LSD, and it wasn't therapeutically active for what he was looking at. So they sort of put the project on the side because it was less effective. And he says in his book, LSD, My Problem Child, that ever since he put it aside, he always felt like he was calling to him. So it was 5 years later, in 1943, where we have the first ever LSD experience due to accidental exposure. After the accidental exposure, he then went ahead and followed his curiosity and self-experimented with 250 micrograms of LSD. And for people that understand some of the dosing, I mean, that's not a low dose by any means. So when this happened, he was caught off guard, and he had his assistant help him, on his bike, and he biked home to his house where I think he's laid on his couch and had this blissful psychedelic experience. That day is known as Bicycle Day, and is celebrated every year on April 19th. After the discovery of LSD, what we looked at, this compound being what we know as psychedelics, was actually coined psychotomimetics. It was coined this term because scientists at the time believed that the effects that they saw with LSD closely resembled the symptoms seen in schizophrenic and psychotic patient populations. So what LSD was then utilized for by clinicians was to model psychosis, and they would actually ingest LSD to try to gather more insights. That way they can peer into the minds of their psychotic patients through self-administration. Sorry, this is a bad picture, but essentially right here, Sandoz Pharmaceuticals created Dosage, which is essentially the LSD. It came in tablet form as well as liquid form. And when they started providing more of the LSD to clinicians, they realized that there really wasn't much of a connection between LSD and schizophrenia. But what they did realize was that LSD can have huge potential in helping treat a variety of mental health conditions. So when this came out, and people were aware of this in the 50s, what happened was there was a variety of different approaches to utilizing LSD in psychotherapy, and they spanned all across the US, UK, and Europe. And what we got were two different types of approaches, one being psychedelic therapy and the other being psycholytic therapy. So psychedelic therapy is utilizing these moderate to larger doses That 250 micrograms, for example, would be would be considered psychedelic therapy at the larger dose. And the emphasis of ingesting the dose is based off of the dose day and the unity people feel, the blissful states, the potential ego dissolution, and then essentially uncovering a lot of trauma and then analyzing it in retrospect and integrating that. Whereas psycholytic therapy is using more lower to moderate doses, so that way it can help essentially lubricate the mental gears in the person for enhancing talk therapy, group therapy, or art therapy. So that's a brief overview of psychedelic versus psycholytic therapy, and those two practices emerging with the identification of LSD for treating these different mental health conditions. And it wasn't until 1949 we actually identified serotonin. At the time, we thought it was more of a hormone just flowing through the blood. And then it was 4 years after we identified serotonin is when we discovered that serotonin is actually a neurotransmitter found in mammalian brains. And a lot of folks point to suggest that the understanding and identifying, discovering LSD is part of the reason as to what led us to realizing that serotonin, due to similar activity, is what might lead to mental disorders, being the disruption or disturbances of serotonin levels in the brain. This is also analogous to iproniazide. It was an anti-tuberculosis medication that they found that folks taking this medication were also had higher mood elevation or better moods, primarily because it increased their monoamine neurotransmitters, being your dopamine, your norepinephrine, and your serotonin. So now in the 50s and 60s, these clinical studies, they researched LSD for the treatment of anxiety, depression, and terminally ill patients. They researched alcoholism, addiction, chronic depression, prisoner recidivism, manic depression, psychosis. And the issue is that although we had awesome results from that, the issue here is that a lot of the research at this time, they didn't have the same standards in place that we do now, or the institutional oversight to ensure just like a proper operational procedure in enrolling patients, and it lacks validated, quantifiable outcome measures and control groups. So what we can say based off the research in the 60s is that there's a lot of promise, and there's an amazing safety profile, being that millions of people dosed LSD recreationally, and there's hundreds of thousands of patients utilizing this in clinics as well, with zero ever recorded fatality due to LSD. Moving forward, more analogous to or tangential to the therapeutic, being more the pop culture. So once it got caught wind, the potential with LSD, and also the excitement and energy, and just the recreational aspects of LSD, that LSD and other psychedelics started penetrating to American pop culture. And then because of a variety of different patient populations, people ingesting these compounds, and uncontrolled settings, lack of education, no setting preparation, what was identified were a variety of adverse drug reactions, and really a lot of just challenging experience, or bad trips, as some may call it. These experiences were exaggerated and headlined by public news media, by stations, magazines. And in 1966, because of a lot of this, Sandoz actually withdrew their LSD medication from the market. A couple years later, LSD possession became federally outlawed. And then, as we all know, the Controlled Substances Act then deemed LSD, among other psychedelics, cannabis, as a Schedule I substance. Schedule I meaning that it lacks medical utility and is highly dangerous or abusive. So that's a brief historical overview of LSD. Daniel, feel free to include anything from your perspective there, historically, if there's anything. Would you like to add there?
Well, I sort of feel like if I start, I won't be able to stop.
Okay, we'll talk about it after this then.
I would like to note, just maybe a few things historically that probably a lot of people here, a lot of their favorite music and art was created by people who used LSD.
Right.
Steve Jobs, said that he used LSD and that helped him become inspired to create his products. Francis Crick, who first posited the theory of DNA,
Yeah. Yep.
said that he had a vision of DNA on LSD. And so
Yeah.
there's just a lot of, it just really weaves through our culture, American culture, in a lot of ways, and it doesn't get it doesn't often get its due. And that's even happening now in medicalization, with things like psilocybin and MDMA coming forward and being shown a lot of love. LSD is sometimes even, pushed to the side or considered to be, the hippie drug of less therapeutic value. And it's not necessarily true.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for including that. So pharmacologically, how LSD works is that it binds and activates a variety of serotonin receptors, primarily what we know as a serotonin or the serotonin 2A or 5-HT2A receptor. That is known as like the psychedelic switch. And we've spoken about this in previous molecule of the month conversations or preparation circuits. However, what's a bit more unique, to my knowledge, is that the dopamine 2 receptor is also activated. So that's a little bit more unique for LSD based off of some of the text I would read. Additionally, the time to onset here is a 30-minute time to onset. So you start noticing some of these subjective or even physiological effects of LSD after 30 minutes upon administration. And then the peak of the experience is usually reached by hour 2 or 3, and it's a longer plateau relative to other psychedelic compounds, being the peak also lasting around 2 to 3 hours. Some of the substantial effects can also continue for up to 10 to 12 hours following administration. So as Daniel mentioned, some of the medical models, I think that in addition to the unfortunate stigma surrounding LSD, one other thing too is like how do we optimize a medical system with a 12-hour sitter, right? So it's going to be that's a little, I think, an additional obstacle when it comes to navigating that conversation. Dosing wise, a microdose, and thank you, Airwood, for your awesome resource. Airwood is an awesome resource for anyone that wants to check it out. It's just pulled from their website. A microdose of LSD is between 5 to 10 micrograms. A light dose is 20 to 75 micrograms. Common dose is 50 to 150 micrograms. This is generally, again, what we'll normally see in in culture today. When it comes to what they were doing in the 50s and 60s research-wise, one of the tablets of LSD was 25 micrograms, and then therapists and clinicians were recommended to titrate up a tablet to find the optimal dosage for their patients. Moving forward, a strong dose is 150 to 400 micrograms, and then a heavy dose is 400 micrograms plus. To my understanding, we usually see doses of LSD broken up in around 100 micrograms per tab. Tabs are usually found in the blotter, and I think that should be in the next slide. Yep. So dosage formulations we see here, right here with this awesome Adventure Time blotter art. This is all broken up into unique doses or tabs or like hits, and every one is generally around the same amount of LSD, and usually it all varies depending on sourcing, but usually it's around 100 micrograms. Additionally, you can do liquid LSD. There's a couple ways to go about it. One is actually getting sourcing pure liquid LSD. Another would be taking a tab or tabs or blotter and then diluting it into some type of water soluble solution, and then letting that settle for a while, and then utilizing a dropper for dosing. We see this a lot with microdosing LSD. And then additionally, we have gelatin, also known as window panes. And then, as I mentioned with the research studies, they use tablets, use capsules, and we also saw injections as well. When it comes to the potential indications, these are the previously researched indications, and then in the asterisks here are the ongoing research projects. You have depression, suicidality, anxiety of death, cluster migraines, addiction, prisoner recidivism. I believe some of the data there was published by Leary, and I think again, as we spoke about those not so great standards of approaching research, I think that maps specifically. I think Rick Doblin had a follow-up study on that on Leary's initial study, and found that there were some conflicting results or data there. But still very interesting to see that this was a potential indication and was researched. The effects we generally see with LSD, physically, we've actually been able to find pain relief, an enhancement or distortion of some sensations. Visually, you have color enhancement or increased visual acuity, saturation of colors is much clearer. You have geometric patterns, tracers, and internal hallucinatory states, being more along the lines of a blindfolded experience, having the eyes closed or shut. People can navigate many channels of consciousness from their stories regarding these internal hallucinatory states. And then cognitively, intense introspection, immersion into the present moment, creativity has been acknowledged and expressed. We see an increase in social and emotional connection, hence some of the benefits that was identified with psycholytic therapy. Time dilation, thought loops, ego dissolution can also occur with higher doses. Now, some of the side effects or the the unwanted effects would be increased blood pressure, increased heart rate, increased body temperature. Nothing too crazy. I think when it came to blood pressure, it was like 10 to 15 points on the systolic blood pressure. So nothing crazy, but if you already have high blood pressure or have a family history of or congenital heart disease, definitely consult a cardiologist, especially considering this experience is much longer than DMT, for example. Some other side effects would be hallucinogen persistent perception disorder, also known as HPPD. I believe there are two types of HPPD. I'm not sure which one is which, but one is flashbacks, and that's been generally spoken about. Not common at all, but essentially the psychedelic experience that a person had while on LSD can sometimes hit them again as a flashback months to years later on after the experience with no ingestion. The other type is more related to peripheral changes. So, for example, like seeing like a carpet moving in the background, the corners of your eyes. I believe that's also one of the types of HPPD. Another term here, potential side effects. It's actually coined by some of the team members on Silo Health. We call it maladaptive ontological shock syndrome, or MOS. And really, it just comes down to not grounding yourself, not just using psychedelics and other tools more for escapism versus trying to benefit yourself or ground yourself or integrate yourself. Everyone has a right to cognitive liberty fundamentally, but unfortunately, in the pursuit of that, some people may just grow maladaptive behaviors, and they want to pursue another day of enlightenment or another perception change, and that can be negative, unfortunately. One thing I wanted to also bring up again is that there are 0 documented deaths associated with LSD use, and that when it comes to any chronic adverse effects, specifically relating to like mood disturbances, especially long-term mood disturbances, that has been noted. It's not very common, but it's primarily due to a lack of setting or preparation, or already having some very poor psychological stability prior to the experience. And that's also due in part to set and setting. So the importance of set and setting is huge with any of these tools. I know Daniel has a lot of resources and insight there. So in closing, as always, as mentioned, set and setting, extremely important. LSD has an awesome backstory, and LSD is not physiologically addictive, but tolerance can build up. So that's why microdosing regimens are usually 1 day on, 2 days off, or a couple days on, a couple days off. LSD, among other psychedelics, is a tool to expand mental states, to identify with ourselves, to feel interconnected, to feel united, and to work through some emotional baggage. It's an amazing tool. Now we just need more research to express that. And if you're into decriminalization, get in, do it, support it. And as I mentioned earlier, the Controlled Substances Act has classified LSD as a Schedule I substance among other psychedelics. We realize and recognize that based off of the FDA, DEA's own criteria of a Schedule I substance, LSD, among other psychedelics, should not be in this class. The safety data is robust. The breakthrough designation status for a variety of psychedelics and the anecdotal research we've seen really warrants at least it's rescheduling, if not it's complete descheduling. So with that, thank you so much for hearing me speak. Any feedback is appreciated, and I'm really excited to learn from the community here too, because this is not one of my fortes in LSD. Psilocybin is my passion molecule. But yeah, I'm really excited for the conversation here. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dr. Saad. I really appreciate, the very thorough and thoughtful treatment of the molecule.